Oh, okay. There is a lot of feedback coming from your end. Um, okay, I am just going to introduce the current panelists for the first one, and then we will get back to Ola and see if her audio has cleared up. So the first panel, which we are going to be discussing policing and protesting. We have Sarah from the Forefront Project, who is the head of development and policing. She's a racial justice campaigner who works for a member of a youth-led organization. The Forefront Project empowers young people with experiences of violence and criminal justice to fight for justice, peace, and freedom. Their work centers transformative justice and healing whilst directly challenging the UK's addiction to criminalisation, policing, and prisons. They have pioneered a unique approach that empowers the most directly harmed by violence and the criminal justice system to be at the forefront of a grassroots movement for change. Sarah's work for the Forefront is transforming the way in which society understands how to support communities affected by violence and shaping the agenda around how to address the systemic causes of it. In the wake of the brutal killing of George Floyd in the US, Forefront have been fighting for police accountability and racial justice here in the UK. Next on the panel is Courtney. He is a project manager for the Future Men Boys Development Program. This program is delivered to boys in the final years of primary school, preparing for transition, and boys at varying stages of secondary school, combining one-to-one mentoring and group sessions. The program encourages boys to improve their skills in effective communication, conflict management, and emotional literacy. The program facilitates positive peer mentoring and is tailored to be inclusive of all school-age boys, including those who may be at risk of disengagement or exclusion. Through meaningful activities and discussion, boys are encouraged to thrive in education, to develop their aspirations, and to navigate challenges of the male adolescence. And we also have I don't know if Ola's back, but if we can have those people on the panel for the first one. And then we also have Ife Thomas, who is a barrister and community activist who founded the charity Black Learning Achievement and Mental Health, which partners with schools to teach students Black history, which is currently not part of the national curriculum. She fiercely advocates for British schools to incorporate honest and unvarnished narratives about empire and colonialism into their curricula. In recent weeks, founded the Black Protest Legal Fund to provide legal support and representation for UK Black Lives Matter protesters. And then lastly, we have Vivian, who is a NHS mental health service and assistant psychologist. And she is also a singer and an advocate for better mental health education within the Black community. So while we wait for Ola to come back, we will just start with an introduction from the current panelists to just tell us their views about the current moment and what is happening and how Black people can better protect themselves when it comes to protesting. If we could start with Courtney, that would be great.
Hello there, everybody. My name is Courtney. As you've heard, I'm a Boys Development Program coordinator. Most of my work is in Wandsworth at the moment, working in boys, particularly in secondary schools and some in primary schools. In terms of the matter of protesting itself, I found in remote working at the moment with the boys, whereas I'd usually be in school, remote working with them. A lot of my boys in secondary school were kind of encouraged to want to be out there protesting, and not necessarily because they understood the, shall we say, the battle going on at the moment, the aim and the change that we were looking for, but more due out of boredom and lack of social interaction. They kind of saw it as a chance to kind of be like, oh, there's people here, so let me engage with this. Let me be a part of this. But actually, as time went on, we were able to kind of have those more mature and positive discussions about actually how this affects me, how this affects you, how this will affect you in the future. In terms of me working with my boys and behavior, it's always that discussion of perception and how you're perceived in your actions. And to go out and protest is it's a powerful thing to do for yourself as an individual. But as we've seen, we have to do it in a way where we're safe, where we are being perceived to do it in a right way, which is not aggressive, which is not threatening. A lot of the young people don't quite understand that notion. For them, it's fun. And so I've had to do a lot of kind of conversations around developing that mind frame that actually this is an important moment, and depending on how this moment goes, it will determine how you were treated and what kind of outcomes we get as a community, as a people, as humanity in this race, basically. And it's been quite a difficult one. They haven't had the experiences necessarily that we've had. They've seen what's been happening in the 2000s. We have the millennial generation. When we take it back before that, they kind of don't believe the treatment that some of us have had growing up. They don't believe how interactions with the police hasn't necessarily been as well. Some people see it as in a positive way at the moment, because due to social media, we are now visibly seeing what a lot of us have been talking about and sharing stories from my parents, stories from the older generation. This is how it used to go. This is what we dealt with on a daily basis. Social media has made that more visible. Social media is a very big tool to the young people. And it's only now people are going, oh, so you are having that experience. You are going through that. And it's an unfortunate thing. It's a sad thing to see, but people have to see it. They've been hearing it, but they haven't been seeing it. And now they're seeing it. They can't contest it like how they were before. And although it's very easy to become angry, we need to be angry, but then we need to think, how do we direct that anger into a good focus, into a positivity? And that's what the work is about at the moment, especially with the boys I'm working with who are from the areas of Wandsworth, which is kind of a slightly impoverished area. They don't have a lot of access to provisions. Not being at school, the government said, okay, well, they're not going to be at school, so they can do work from home. Not everybody's had the internet. Not everybody's had a laptop. There is a lot of anger amongst the community at the moment. The adults feel like their children are not being provided for. Young people feel like they're not being looked in. They're not cared for. So a lot of them have jumped onto the roads. They've jumped into protesting with slightly different aims and ambitions. And it's been kind of up to us to help try to mold and process their emotions, but help them understand this is the kind of battle you need to kind of be campaigning for, be protesting for, being a voice for, a positive voice, and a voice that moves forward and wants change in a way that's going to help and not kind of take us back a step. I myself, I'm a person who doesn't necessarily condone the actions where we have the looting and the violence, but those are outcomes of mostly people's ignorance and that, the action of those who are not necessarily part of the rightful side of the protest. It's the minority, not the majority. And hopefully the young people I've been working with are not part of that minority.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to Ife now. If you could just give us how you're currently feeling in this movement, this moment, and what you've been doing and what your role has been. Ife, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm trying to start my video, but it says that the host has stopped my video. So there we go. Hi everyone. So yeah, for me, in terms of how I'm feeling about the movement at the moment, I always say that, sometimes history doesn't often repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I think right now we're in a stage where history is kind of rhyming. I see the Black Lives Matter movement as a tool for Black liberation. And I think Black liberation has been going on for as long as Black oppression has been, envisioned and about. So for me, I see the Black Lives Matter movement as a continuation of Black liberation, a different form of Black liberation, one that's adopted and maneuvered to the way in which Black people who have historically, stood up to injustice have, been targeted, have been, killed by the state and all of these kind of things. So I think literally it is a movement that is reactive to how in the past, when we had a leader, it was easy to target someone, whereas at the moment, because it's kind of a movement in which it's grassroots, there's not a particular person that you attribute to the movement, but it's more of, a collective grievance. And I think I remember someone was saying to me like last year, oh, the Black Lives Matter movement might have died. And, what comes to my mind all the time is a quote by Sata Shakur when she says that, people think they've got a Black revolutionary, or they've, they captured a Black revolutionary and they're in prison, whereas the conditions that we find ourselves in shape Black revolutionaries, were shaped in the ghettos that we find ourselves in. So until Black oppression is not a thing, then we're going to always have new movements coming to fruition to ensure that the aim of Black liberation is fruitful and it's something that is normalized. So I see Black Lives Matter as a way to challenge historic oppression, and particularly when I look at the UK, looking at, the past injustices that we're not really taught about because we're focused to look at America. I've been learning a lot more about Black British culture and narratives, particularly around collective activism against state violence. So looking at, there's a film called Injustice, which you can check out on Vimeo, which was done by Ken Farrow. And it talks about, in the early 90s, there was like, a wave of Black deaths in custody, and the community galvanized together, and when I was listening to the videos, I was hearing people saying no justice, no peace. And that was in 1995, and it's like we're still saying the same thing. And I think, as I was saying, history often rhymes. And I think all too often we do forget that, this is not a new struggle. And I think people think, oh, why now? Or what's going on right now? When actually oppression's always been here. And, there's just so many statistics, like the fact that Black students are just pushed, excluded from school, 3 times likely to be excluded from school. You've got 40 times likely to be stopped by the police. We're victims of disproportionate use of violence and force from the police as well. So, in our everyday interactions in life, we are affected disproportionately by racism and discrimination. So I think the reason why young people are going to the streets, because literally we're living in a society in which their oppression has been normalized. So for them, this is a collective vehicle for them to speak out against injustices and have a movement which they feel centered and they feel important. I think all too often, we're not seen in the mainstream media, our voices are not really heard, we don't have a seat at the tables. I think this is a grassroots movement in which people that don't have a voice can actually get the attention of everybody. And literally with the Black Lives Matter movement, nobody could ignore it. Like the protest, nobody could ignore it. It was front page news, and it's like you've had to sit down and listen to what we think are issues in terms of like making the curriculum more diverse. Since this whole new movement, I feel like even BLAM, the amount of followers that we've got, the amount of support that we've got, the amount of schools that want us to come into their schools and change their curriculum has just been immense. And I remember a few months before, I'd be emailing schools, I wouldn't be getting a response. I think, the change in the public mood is something that is, very unique. We've never been in a time like this before. So, I'm in a stage where I'm quite excited for the change that's going to happen within people on the ground. I think people are no longer waiting for those in authority to take change, but actually seeing what they can do in their own sphere and their own circles, whether that's reading more anti-racist literature, whether that's trying to change their feed, whether that is, trying to ensure that their classroom is much more inclusive for Black narratives. People are doing what they can. And I think that wasn't something that happened before. And I think the fact that we've collectively been drawn to a halt, that the fact we're in a pandemic, we're in a lockdown, everybody is focused on this. I think that is obviously very much unique. And I'm just seeing from all different fields, like even in the legal sector, I'm seeing in the education sector, you're seeing in healthcare, you're seeing everyone challenging the status quo. And I think, that is what a movement is about. It's about change, and whichever way it finds itself, I think that's important. So that's kind of how I'm feeling about the movement at the moment. And yeah, where my thoughts are at, I think it's a very unique time. I think it's, collective shift in the atmosphere. And I think I'm seeing positive, tangible changes. They may be small wins, but sometimes it's small wins that make a greater change.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to check if Ola's audio is back now. Hello, Ola, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry for the disturbance earlier. It's really nice to hear from you guys from the bits that I was able to hear. I have been protesting as well, and I'm really interested, kind of like, as a migrant in the UK, what does like the law and the legal system really says about policing, about protesting, and kind of coming in contact with police, because a lot of our young people are getting, so I'm hearing a lot of stories of people kind of being carted into corners and kind of being kind of just watched by the police as they're being protested and being stopped for unnecessary reasons. And just what are our legal rights when it comes to protesting?
So is this for me, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so in terms of for protesting, I mean, the pandemic has made things quite difficult and different, but I would say in terms of like, traditionally, if someone was to set up a static protest, you don't necessarily need to ask for any sort of permission, because that's something that you can just kind of ad hoc do. You can turn up as long as it's on land that's not privately owned, you can hold a demonstration. So that's something that is not of issue. But however, particularly because we are in a pandemic and we've got the lockdown regulations and stuff, there's a lot of, obviously the regulations are always changing. So now we've got a thing where 30 people can gather together, and that's it. So I think as long as it's done social distancing, you can say the same way you go to a park and everyone's in the park together, but they're not, they're all socially distancing. That is a way in which, you know, we have been advising, you know, protesters to, or people that are going on marches to be like, you know, you're kind of in a small group, and in that way you can't really say, oh, well, you're part of a large march, or you're same way you go to a beach and, you know, you're in a small gathering. That is how we're kind of looking at it in that same way. And we don't see that people getting sent home in mass when they're on the beaches together, or we don't see people getting sent home in mass when they're in the park together either. So same way we say that, you know, go in your smaller group of 6 or more people. I mean, the police can still say to you that, you know, you don't have a reasonable excuse to be here, and they could fine you and say you can go home. But then we all have a right, human right to protest, Article 11 rights. So that's something that should be considered as well. And it's about balancing. So if you're in the courts, it would be a balancing act, you know, whether or not it was justified for you to have your right to protest restricted. So it's complicated because of the lockdown, but, you know, normally everyone has the right to protest. But I think within the lockdown and the regulations, it's been something that has been, you know, interesting, I think. So, and we're still kind of seeing what's going to happen in the courts, and, you know, how the courts are going to be looking at things. But what we can say is that if you are to go out, you know, make sure you're social distancing, following regulations, you know, ensuring that you are in the smaller groups. And then, as we said, same way as you're looking at in the beach, when you've got everyone social distance, even though they're on the beach together, same way we're looking at protesting as well. So that's what I would say. In terms of what we were witnessing on the ground as legal observers, we did see a lot of like kettling, so the police were doing like containments and stuff, and what we were noticing is that the use of Section 50 of the Police Reform Act was done in a manner which was quite alarming to us, in that they were kind of using it as a blanket ban rule, that, you know, anyone that was in the kettle had to give over their personal details, which is not what the law says. The law says that if you are suspected of taking part in antisocial behaviour, then you should give your name and those details that is required within the act. But what we were seeing is that they were trying to say that everybody in the kettle should give their personal details over, which is not what the law says. So we were able to challenge the police and be like, you know, ask the police, you know, what antisocial behaviour have I taken part in? What have you seen me take part in? And kind of challenge them. And then once we saw that happening, we saw that people and the police weren't taking people's details once they knew their rights. So what we would say is that, you know, Black Protest Legal, we're on Twitter. Check us out if you're going to go to any marches. We've had legal observers at every single march. If you see anybody with a high-vis jacket, look out for us. If you're like not sure about anything, come and ask for a bus card that we give out, which has all your rights on it, and your and updated rights around what protesting within the coronavirus regulation, what that means and stuff like that. So yeah, what I would say is like look out for legal observers. If you're concerned about anything, you know, Black Protest Legal is happy to answer any questions and give advice and support when required. But just be attentive in terms of if the police are using disproportionate force against you and force that you're concerned about, make a note of it, make a note of their badge numbers, you know, just be attentive to taking information down. If you see the police acting in a manner which you think is unfair or you think you was unfairly treated, take a note of what's happened so that if you want to challenge it, you have all the information required. That's what we would say.
Thank you so much for that information. I just also like to add, throw the question to both of you. We're seeing that like kind of Black and BMA people are being 3 times likely to be arrested during COVID and during COVID policing. So like, why do you think that is happening and how can we engage and reduce these numbers? Hello?
Yeah, hello. I
Yeah.
thought you said it's to 2 of us. Or
Yeah. Either one of you can.
Yeah, so I'll let the other person speak instead of me.
Hi there. So in kind of my experiences with the kind of boys I'm working with, being stopped by the police is kind of, it's a regular basis. It was there before COVID-19, and at the moment it's kind of there after COVID-19. And it's something that we've been trying to kind of thank God on it and try to push forward for, in terms of giving the boys the knowledge and the background to kind of say, well, if I'm in this situation, how do I handle myself so I come out in a positive way? The protesting has just kind of been an avenue where police have been able to kind of collect these boys in a group just to say, right, you're here, we're going to take you, we're going to look at you, you look suspicious, you look dodgy, and actually we feel, if I've got to be honest, I'm going to say they feel threatened by boys in large groups, okay? You know, we have crimes going on in the areas as we do, we're all aware of that, but we know that Black boys, specifically Black boys, are being picked out amongst the communities, amongst the population, and they're the ones who are having to face it on a daily basis. And it kind of merged their vision. You know, the police are meant to be there to support the community. At the moment, they don't feel supported. They feel threatened, they feel scared. And actually, the thought is, if I leave my house, how many times am I going to be stopped today? What am I going to be stopped for today? And that's not what we want. So again, we are trying to encourage building positive relations. We're talking about communication with the police. We're talking about how we as a community can try to change the face and perception of how we're perceived. But this is as you probably feel, it's probably a strenuous time for us. COVID-19 has kind of just put everybody into a big kind of a jar here, and all the issues that were going on have just kind of been mixed into everything that's happening. So it's at the forefront. We have our movement going on. We've got Black Lives Matter. We've got dealing with racial profiling. We've got the improper use of the laws against the young people, and we're just trying to kind of handle things one thing at a time. In terms of the difficulties that the young people facing, I think more so it's having their voice heard, and having their voice heard in the right way and being supported. And that's only going to start happening with the kind of increased relations with the police, with the community stepping up for them, with them coming into schools, likewise coming out of the schools and younger people talking to younger people, going into places and talking about their experiences and saying, well, this is what happened to me, and this is how, you know, this can help you in that situation. In terms of the actual protesting, I can't really add too much to myself because I myself haven't been out on the roads at the moment due to my personal circumstances. My wife is pregnant, so I haven't taken that risk at the moment. But if she wasn't, I would have liked to have been there, and I would have been right there at the forefront there. So I'm doing my part from home. I'm trying to empower the youth from the relationship that I have with them from my work. Oops, sorry for those who couldn't hear me.
All right, thank you for that. I just like to, there's been a lot of kind of in the media and on the internet, a lot about kind of reform and abolition. We know that like in the UK, there's been a lot of talk about like police reform, and there's been a lot of kind of policy reform, but we're not actually seeing like those reform play out in the way that the police are like reacting and interacting with Black young people. Why do you think that is? And what do you think the difference is between reform and abolition? And give us a little bit more understanding on how, what policing could possibly look like for in the UK.
Sorry, Ola, I'm just going to jump in 1 second. I'm cautious that Sarah hasn't spoken yet. So sorry, Sarah, if you could introduce yourself, and also if you would like to take on the question that Ola has posed as well.
Hi, is someone able to start my, oh yeah. Hi, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, my name's Sarah. I work for an organisation called the Forefront Project. We're a member-led youth organisation that empowers young people to fight for justice, peace and freedom. We support young people with experiences of violence in the criminal justice system to create change, and this is change in their own lives, their communities and wider society. So the police killing of George Floyd in the US has reinvigorated a global movement for racial justice. I think something that is really important to bear in mind is that the UK isn't innocent within any of this. There's been 1,744 deaths in police custody in the UK. Not one police officer has been held accountable. So when we hear calls to defund the police and invest in communities, we're saying the police aren't here to protect us. So while some communities maybe experience a police service, for many Black communities, all we experience is a police force. At the Forefront Project, we support young people that are victims of police brutality every day. They survive, but are never given any kind of justice or adequate support. So when we talk about abolition, what we're talking about is reimagining what society could look like from the ground up. It's recognizing that the police don't keep our communities safe. So even just recently, it's come out that the equivalent of 30% of Black men aged between 15 and 24 were stop and searched throughout the period of lockdown, which is just outrageous. So it's saying, what would community models of support look like? And I think a key part of this is investing in mental health, it's investing in education, it's investing in opportunities for young people. These are the things which young Black people in particular haven't been afforded. And the other thing I'd like to say is, yeah, I'd also like to say in our work at the Forefront, because we support young people that are affected by serious violence, it's important to recognize that their experience of systemic violence compounds their experience of community violence. So because they don't feel able to call the police, because the police don't provide anything of a police service to them, it means that that can actually perpetuate cycles of violence in the community. And I think this is really important to recognize if we're ever going to talk about building peace in a way that is meaningful.
Thank you for that.
And then we're just going to bring in Vivian, who also works in mental health. I think as Sarah was speaking about how Black people's mental health is affected because of like policing and the police force, I think would be a good time. So if you could also speak about your experience of protesting and mental health in the Black community, Vivian.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool. Yeah, so it's quite difficult when you look at mental health and the kind of external factors that can contribute. Things like racial discrimination, police brutality, even collective trauma in terms of constantly having to see Black bodies, you know, treated in that way on TV screens or, you know, sent around on social media. All these things have a long-term effect on racial self-esteem, and it has kind of it's almost like a chipping away effect of your well-being. So if you imagine, you know, when somebody goes through, for example, an episode of psychosis, often or not there's a stressor or there's something that's happened right beforehand that's kind of triggered that. But when you have a life of constant difficulty, so, you know, all the difficulties that people from the Black community face in places like Britain, where, you know, it's either disadvantages at schools or it's, you know, the way the police treat you, or it's social, economical, all these things kind of play on that kind of cycle of your life. And by the time you now get older, all these things that have kind of been chipping away at you makes it even harder to sustain a life trigger. So there's loads of psychological kind of theories around it that all support the concept that constantly living in that kind of discrimination is very poor for your mental health, and can explain why there's such high disparity in regards to mental health in the Black community compared to white counterparts. But then when you go to places in the world where Black people are the majority, you don't have that same disparity. So it's something about being Black in Britain or Black in Europe where you are constantly faced with these things, where you start to see that. So it is difficult, and it's very much underlooked. And I do find that when people want to understand, working class people and why that might be difficult, and why trauma, for example, might contribute to someone's ill health, it's very easy to understand. But then when we speak about race, especially in Britain, because we shy away from the effects of race, people want to say, oh, you're playing the race card. Oh, all you need to do is work harder. But if we're talking about some kind of abuse as a child, people can fathom that can have an effect on your future. But I think because people discredit racial difficulties, and it's a form of gaslighting. You tell someone your experience and they tell you, well, that's not really happening. It makes it difficult to pitch the idea and to push it forward. So I think part of the moving forward is to push the awareness that actually what we're going through in Britain does make it difficult to just be okay. We're living in a traumatic setting. So yeah, it's something to heavily consider and to appreciate, and to also take time to recover from that, and to know that it's not your fault. It's the predisposition that we're in, unfortunately. Hope that answered your question. Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, it did. Thank you very much. Ola, do you have any more questions to ask any of our panelists?
Sorry, I'm dealing with two devices here. Yes, in terms of mental health, Black mental health, how do you advise kind of young people to kind of take care of their mental health, but also kind of, I felt for me, protesting was a way in which I could engage with my anger and engage with my mental health and like express those feelings of hurt about the climate of our society right now. But if you can't protest, if you can't go outside, how do you advise people to engage in kind of like the political climate, and to kind of engage with not feeling so kind of overwhelmed with all this information that's being thrown at you, and petitions and what to do and whatnot? Ev would like to go first.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And the BIPP, the Black Organization for Psychology and Psychiatry, did a really good talk on that, where the lady was speaking about the fact that actually being okay in these kind of environments is a form of revolution in itself. And being able to take care of yourself is a form of protest, because when you're living in a society that's constantly oppressing you and putting you down in so many levels, to actually be okay within that, that's enough. And if that's all you can do, that's absolutely fine, because you being okay, that's part of the struggle anyway. So firstly, I think, yeah, people need to definitely take care of themselves. And that's really important. And I guess moving beyond that, part of caring for yourself is feeling like you have a sense of power within this. And it's such a huge structure. And I can't remember who said it earlier, speaking about Ife, was speaking earlier about how, we have people that have been, resisting for years in Britain, in America, across the globe. And sometimes these people, it costs them their lives. So it's not everyone's burden to bear in the same way, but there's so many different ways you can do it. So whether it's just, sharing petitions, or it's donating the money you have. I guess when it comes to young people, projects like the Forefront project are amazing because it teaches them how they can have power within their grasp. And sometimes I think if we don't have, you know, the finances or the resources to go out, then educating yourself on Black history is empowerment as well. Because sometimes it's kind of overlooked, but if all you're taught is that you know you're a slave and now you've been freed and you should be grateful, that sets a very backwards way of thinking in a society that already looks at you in a certain way. So the more you kind of learn about your vast history and the history before, you know, European contact, and how successful for the majority of time, actually longer than Europeans have been in power, that African people or people of African descent have been living very successfully, actually, it changes your mindset and it kind of places you in a better place when you look forward and look at where you could be going. So I definitely think educating yourself on you know our true history, not the negative parts that have just happened and that we're trying to break out of, and yeah, that kind of giving into self, because I think we're so used to carrying loads and we're so used to constantly being under attack that we don't even think about the restoring of the internal. We're constantly just trying to push through, and I think it's important to find those things that actually give us joy, give us life, give us some kind of peace. We are definitely a collective people. You know, it's very difficult being of a collective culture and living in an individualistic society the way European culture typically is. So I think leaning on those, leaning on our collective support, like community really does a lot for us. And I think trying to tap into that. So whether that's, you know, having your online Zoom calls or connecting with family, you know, using the things that are part of our culture that give us strength. So yeah, I think education, leaning on culture, and looking after self are the main things.
So I want to throw this one to Leonie. How do you kind of look after your mental health? Like what are the things that you do? What are the steps that helps you take care of your mental health?
I think so far in this moment, one of the things has been learning when to switch off and just enjoy. I'm very politically informed, so also realizing that consuming vast amounts of what is usually Black trauma is not healthy in a bid to stay informed. As someone who has and is studying politics, I feel like I do have a wider capacity to handle a lot of traumatic information because history in itself is very traumatic. They don't teach you about the nice stuff. It's always the wars, the violence, the conflict. But just knowing when to like watch a YouTube video or watch a TV show I enjoy, or just speak to friends and, like Vivian was saying, have a Zoom call. I also would like to ask the other panelists about what they would envision, like for them, what would perfect policing look like? Or if there is such thing as perfect policing, can policing exist? I know Ola has very interesting thoughts about policing and, you know, how they can, if they can be reformed, if they should exist. So I would really like to hear more about that from Ola, but also from the other panelists as well.
Hi, yes, I have, in my opinion, policing doesn't really like get to the root of the problem. It's very much about punishment. And especially when we look at kind of like the history of policing in the UK and just the history of also kind of Black presence in the UK, when we look at like the Windrush generation, and even though they were given kind of British citizenship, they came and they were seen as threats, and they were seen as an incursion by the Labour Prime Minister at the time. And it's the policing isn't made, and it hasn't been formed to take care of the oppressed. It was made to take care of property rights. It was made to take care of the elite. And so I think that like radically the police as we know it needs to change. I think that like a lot of conversation has been talked about kind of like community policing, but also what does that look like? How do we engage with policing in a way that's holistic, where actual care is being taken, where the root of crime is actually being tackled, as opposed to people just being punished, and a system of just like, you know, the school to prison pipeline. And so it's like, like, for me, I think the importance is definitely on tackling the issues within our communities, and funneling money that we're spending on policing on that. And I think that like that would reduce crime so radically in the way that we know it. And we've seen kind of places in America start to do things like that and see successes like that. And I guess like, yeah, that's my opinion. Do any of the panelists like to say anything? I'd like to hear what Sarah thinks.
Hi. Yeah, I completely agree with what you were saying. Like, I don't think we can have conversations about reforming the police. These conversations have been going on since, I mean, it's been 21 years since the Macpherson report came out and said that the police are institutionally racist. We don't need any more reports to tell us these things. And as Ola was saying, like, I really think what we should be doing is investing in community alternatives, and investing in health, investing in education. The other really important thing to say here is that the remit of policing has expanded to such a degree where police are responding to mental health crises, and that's just way beyond their remit and actually perpetuates cycles of trauma. And communities have never been given the space to process that trauma. In fact, we're living in perpetual states of trauma when the police are constantly embedded in our communities. So when we say defund the police and invest in communities, it's investing in space for us to heal. And there needs to be like a truth and reconciliation process there, where like the police and the state are held accountable for generational trauma. And then we're given the resources to be able to actually build thriving communities. That's what we really need.
Yeah, I would echo what everyone else has said. I think if we're gonna, I'm definitely agreeing with defunding the police, because the police budget is, particularly in the UK, it's just one of the biggest in Europe. And I think that we need to be looking for more community-based alternatives, yes. But I think also we're meant to be living in a community where, if we're having policing, which is what we're having at the moment, it's meant to be policing by consent. So, but we're not having that at the moment. I think we need to look for, if we're going to continue with this notion of policing at the moment, then we need to have the community involved in the policing at every single level, particularly the Black community. So I would say, in terms of even who's recruiting police officers, should be people from the community. Because if you're going to come into our community policing us, harassing us, saying what we need to be doing and what we shouldn't be doing, and you're meant to be the first point of call when we're in danger, we should have a stake in saying who should be in our communities and who should be the ones that are our first respondents. Yeah. And I think also, when there's police misconduct as well, the community should be on the panel. There shouldn't be police officers policing the police about whether or not they've taken part in a misconduct or not. It should be the community deciding whether or not you need to be punished, you need to be reprimanded. I think it should be the community to decide whether or not you are fit to serve us. And I think that notion of the community being removed from policing and all of these things is allowing the system to thrive. I think obviously, I would 100% say defund the police and think of a new alternative system. But I think where we are at in the UK in terms of our abolition movement, I think it's a very new concept for us. I think it's very much an American concept, and I think we're developing our own narrative and our own way of looking at it. And I think obviously America is very good. I think that even the terms that we use, like, we don't really say prison industrial complex here. There's just, like, in terms of language, I think we're trying to develop our own way of looking at things. But I think in the meantime, when we are saying that the police do not serve us because they haven't been serving us, there's a case that I looked at, which is a case of Ibrahim Say, who, this was in the 90s, in which he was having a mental health episode, and the first people that responded to him were the police. He went to the police peacefully, they sprayed a whole can of CS gas on him, had like many officers on him, and literally he died. And again, he was peaceful when he went in. There was nothing to suggest that he was fighting the police, but yet they used excessive force. There was lots of narratives around he was a big black man, and we're seeing again and again these same narratives are what is perpetuating disproportionate deaths in custody. So I think, you know, again, there just needs to be an overhaul of, you know, as we were saying before, who is the police going to be the first respondents to mental health issues? I don't think the police should be the people that are the first responders. We should actually train up people that work in mental health to be supporting and to be the first ones that are being called and things like that. And I would rather have the money for the police in schools being invested in education psychologists to support young people who may be having various different things they're going through, living in extremely economically depressed environments and living with high levels of trauma, living in very violent communities. So I think there's other ways we can look at where the money is spent. But I think if we're going to have a system of policing that we're having in this country, we need to have the communities that are most affected by the police and being involved in every single decision-making level in terms of who's holding them to the account. The community needs to hold them to account if we're going to be going forward with this policing system. And if we can't have that, then we need to rethink what policing looks like, and if we even want to go forward with a system of policing, and, you know, seeing how we address harm, because even some behaviors that are criminalized are not harmful. So what are we, I think we need to kind of reevaluate, you know, how we are looking at things. And, you know, does the prison industrial, does prisons in the UK need to be getting bigger and bigger? Should we, I just saw the MOJ put a tweet out about they're building more prisons. For what? Do you know what I mean? There's so much people that the reoffending rates are really high. You know, the reason why prison is meant to be created is for reform, and we're not seeing reform of people. So it's like we need to really rethink the whole criminal justice system and how it works. And right now, from what we're seeing, statistics on what's happening in terms of repeat offending, it's not doing what it was made to do. So it's not fit for purpose. I think we need to kind of revisit the whole system. And when we're looking at that, we need to look at policing as well.
Thank you so much for that. Do any of the panelists have any more to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to say kind of what's been echoed already is that reevaluation of the current system. I myself, I used to work in Feltham youth offenders. So I was in the prison educational system, and I couldn't stay there because of what I saw and how I was being told to work with these young boys. Primarily, again, it was a lot of black boys who were coming in there. And when you're looking at the cases and hearing the cases, you're thinking, well, hold on, I've seen on the news, I've heard stories about how people who are not black had to do the exact same crimes, they've had less time, or they've been given community service. There's just a lot of things that are wrong within the system, and that's where change needs to happen. And just like in our schools, where we have teachers come in, just an example, teachers who are not from London, they come to London, they work in the schools, they're not used to the type of cultures, they're not used to the type of behaviors that these young boys show. It's not necessarily aggressive, it's not threatening, but it's perceived like that. And that's a problem that's going on in the community. And we need people from our community representing us in the police force. We need them holding the police accountable for their actions towards people in our communities. We need to, there needs to be more glue. There's a lot of cracks, there's a lot of broken mirrors, and we need to start bringing everything together. And that starts with involving the people who are, how should I put it? The people who are at the spear end of this, who are being attacked, who are being hurt, who are being on a daily basis going through trauma. Have our perspective on things, hear our feelings and actually act on what we're saying. And that starts with getting us more involved in the process. That's what we've been left out of the process. We need to be involved in the process, and actually we should be in more control of that process. The police are meant to be there to support us, and to support us means to protect us, means to guide us. It doesn't mean put shackles on us, take us away, put us in a box, because that's what prison is a box. I've been there, I've seen it. There's no reform happening. You know, it's a place to keep people, and all you're doing is waiting for your time, and you come out and you either you've been left behind by society, or you don't know any better because you haven't learned to be better. So yeah, it starts with inside, starting with inside. There's a lot of talk from the outside, and the Black Lives Movement is very good at the moment because people's eyes are open and we're talking. What we don't have is the legislation being changed. That's what we need, law. That's what we need. It's all good having people removed from posts. It's all good having the statues being removed, but we need changes in law, in actual process and government systems.
Thank you, guys. As we draw to a close of this first panel, please do remember to all the attendees that you can ask questions in the Q&A tab. Continue sharing your comments. They are very interesting to read and to just to see where everybody else is at. You know, people are talking about mental health and the deaths in police custody, but also about deaths in mental health institutions, which we will cover in the next panel, which is talking specifically about mental health and Blackness. People are talking about hypervigilance and slavery and the education system, and also trauma, which I think which really resonated with a lot of people when Vivian was speaking about how the collective trauma, you know, how it affects us as a people and how it's left unaddressed. And Black people are just expected to continue existing and moving with all of this generational trauma, but, you know, we're not really having any responses, or we're not having any care taken to it. And yeah, a very interesting discussion about the possibilities of defunding the police as well. So as we have 5 minutes left, we're just gonna go around the panel one last time to just say your closing thoughts, your last sentences, your things about the topic. So we're gonna start with Ife, then we're gonna go to Vivian, and then Sarah, and then Courtney, if Ife would like to start.
Yeah, hi everyone again. Yeah, so my closing thoughts is I think it's important that we are here having these discussions. I think we're kind of putting together what we want, we're kind of imagine things. I think obviously for someone that works in education, particularly empowering young people using Black narratives, and as Viv was saying, in terms of like using Black history to improve the well-being of Black people because we see negative narratives. I think even as adults, we can learn a lot. I think, you know, trying to find out more on the internet about our history. I think reading books, I think books are so important, and there's just so much hidden stuff that you can find in books. Like my book that I'm reading at the moment is this book called Male Daughters, Female Husbands by Ifeadumi. And for me, reading that book talks a lot about African culture prior to colonization as well. It talks about how with a lot of like Black women back in the day, they, you know, they were like literally very much on par in terms of with like men. So in terms of like trading, like ownership, they were able to assert themselves. And, you know, when the European colonizers are there, they literally wrote a like telegraph to the UK saying that we never met women so aggressive and so assertive. Why are they like trying to challenge us? Why do they want to fight us? And they were used to like the women in Britain, which are much more subtle, much more quieter in terms of like not necessarily being at the forefront, you know, fighting or being like as outspoken, because the systems were different in terms of how we look at societies. I think it's important to kind of draw back, look at some of our systems before European intervention, and empower ourselves to actually think that, you know, we can imagine systems that are completely different to what is Eurocentric and what is normalized. So I think reading our narratives, learning a lot more about our history is a way to empower ourselves, and also to think of new ideas from people that have been here before, particularly in the 70s and 80s. There's lots of activists that have fought these kind of things before. A lot of the work that Angela Davis is talking about now, or a lot of things that people are talking about in terms of like prison abolition, she's been writing about it for years. I think kind of stepping back into our people that have created a blueprint for us before and kind of taking that to help us inform new ideas, I think that's very important. Yeah, and I think ensuring that we come together, tap into things more. What I would say is that definitely follow Blam on Twitter and Instagram, Blam Charity. Literally, we are still doing our campaign to get schools to buy our resources and to take up training so that Black history can be normalized in their school settings. So yeah, I think it's kind of join together, seeing what like-minded causes you are passionate about, and if that's volunteering with that cause, do it. If that's, you know, donating to that cause, you know, whatever you can do, like literally even a retweet can just be a form of activism that can help that person connect to someone else that will help their project grow. So I think kind of just tapping into much more Black-led and Black-specific organizations is a way of activism as well. And I think we can continue to make grassroots change as we wait for change to happen at the top. I think we shouldn't forget our collective power as a community and see what we can do with the space that we have now.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask if the rest can keep it to just a minute, please. But Vivian, if you could just say your closing remarks.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. Really enjoyed listening to everyone's input. I guess the main closing for me is the importance of narrative and how we change narrative, and from the narrative we then act on that. So as people were talking earlier about, rather than yeah, taking money away from the police and putting it back in communities. When you look at places like Glasgow, who actually had the highest knife crime rate for, I think it was over 10 years, much higher than London, but was never promoted in that way. And that's an area that is majority white. The way they change that is to invest in their community services and their young people services. So now, you know, their knife crime rate has dropped. So I think there's definitely different narratives that people focus on, and that's why we need to change the narrative. You know, they'll say, "Oh, black boys are carrying knives, black boys are being violent," but actually, you know, the example of Glasgow is a impoverished area. So when they funded it, then they could change. So in the same way that it's not our blackness that causes these problems, it's the way the narrative is pushed, and we need to change that narrative and act on what we know is true. So, yeah.
Thank you. And then Sarah?
Thank you. My closing thoughts. I think we need to remember that campaigning and activism rarely enable the most marginalized to participate. And it should be young people that are most affected by the issues of policing and the criminal justice system, which are at the forefront of these issues. And while trauma can be a really powerful driving force for a movement, it's not sustainable if you don't also build space for healing. And I guess I'm just thinking about how creating space for healing should be a collective responsibility. It's not always the responsibility of the individual. And actually, once we collectivize that responsibility, we can, it makes our movement stronger in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. And then lastly, Courtney?
My closing thoughts are, you know, time and time again, we've had these movements, we've had these sparks, let's keep it going. We've got the visual element, we've got the voices, so let's dig a bit deeper. Let's try use this momentum and get that power within law as well. Law, education, health, we need to be more infused in it. We need to be more ingrained in it, have more choice and say what's going on, so we can make a change for the young people who are the ones who are really kind of suffering from this. We all have our battles, we all have our challenges, but it's the young people that are affected generation after generation. And let's not try to leave too much up to them. Let's be active, let's do what we can. It does start from the young, but if we can educate our young and help them to be the kings and queens that they should feel like they are and are, then we will be on the right tracks to making things better. And hopefully, you know, this is one of those steps that we're doing. Let's make them safe communities, let's get the education, let's get those, the opportunities to have greater lives and have better equality and opportunities.
Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We are going to actually take a break for 10 minutes, and then we are going to come back and start the next panel, which is about mental health, with the panelists. Ola, do you have any final remarks as well?
It's just been lovely hearing all of you and your perspective. I really enjoy kind of engaging and hearing your perspective. So thank you so much.
Yes, so please do come back, or, you know, have a drink, have a break, do whatever, and we will be back in 10 minutes.
Hi everyone, welcome back. So now we're gonna move to the second part. I think, yes?
Go on.
We're gonna move to the second part of the event. We're gonna talk a little bit about Black mental health. Leonie's just gonna take the lead on this and tell us a little bit about her experience. Yeah.
Thank you. Before we get into that, I just wanted to introduce Eve, who has actually been monitoring the conversation over on Twitter, and just wanted to give us an update about the wider conversation and what other people have been saying on social media. So Eve, if you would like to just let us know a bit about what's happening over there.
Hi everyone. So there was a comment in regards to Cressida Dick, who is the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and her apology to Bianca Williams and her partner Linford in regards to the comment was just how lackluster her apology came across, and how it just shows that unless you have power and agency with money or network, it's not possible to get decent treatment as a Black person. And then there was also another comment on just wanting to hear the panelists' views on children, Black children particularly, attending protests, and if this can be a form of trauma or not. And that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are very interesting comments and questions. I think we'd have the panelists just address those things when we are having the discussion. As I am sure, as we have seen from the first panel, there is a lot of crossover between policing, protesting, and mental health, but this one is going to focus on mental health. Currently in the UK, a lot of Black people are suffering from mental health issues, even though Black people only make up a small percent of the population, around 3 or 4%. They found that from 2017 to 18, there were 4 times more higher to find Black people being detained under the Mental Health Act than the white group. They also found out that in the Race Equality Foundation report of 2020, which came out a few months ago, that African Caribbean people are 3 to 5 times more likely to be diagnosed and admitted to hospital for schizophrenia more than any other group. There's also a lot of evidence to show that Black, African, and Caribbean women are more likely to have a common mental health disorder than their white counterparts. And it's also been proven and seen that Black and minority ethnic people are actually less likely to be referred to having talking therapies. There's so much stats and figures around mental health because it really does affect our community a lot, but it's still kind of not spoken about that much. So I guess the first questions to our panelists who are continuing, which is Sarah, Vivian, Ife, and Courtney as well, about how do you think that Black people can better manage their mental health, especially during this time of the pandemic, where people in our community are more likely to die, but also Black Lives Matter is putting a lot of pressure on Black people to be spokespersons, as well as having to display our trauma for people to believe us that we actually face racism and oppression. So if, Sarah, you would like to start?
Thank you. It makes me think of something that was said in the first half of this, which is about how oppression is a collective experience, right? And I think from that, our response must also be collective. So it's building these communities of care, building space for us to heal together. Like how often are people provided with bereavement support? Like my work is with young people that are affected by serious violence. I don't know of young people that can access bereavement support if they've been affected by the death of a friend. I think how many of these young people access therapeutic support? I think we really need to be building these communities which normalize accessing that healing space, but also we need resources. We need resources. Yeah.
Thank you. And Vivian, as somebody who works within mental health, how do you best think that Black people can be managing their mental health, or the responses that we can do, especially in this moment in time?
Yeah, I think it is really difficult, and I definitely agree with what Sarah said about, you know, it is a collective experience, and finding community and collective spaces to talk about that trauma is really important. And it doesn't have to be, you know, sitting down in a circle and, you know, talking about all your pain. Sometimes it's just validating your experiences. One of the difficult things with dealing with race in Britain is that it's very underlying and it's very, you know, covert, it's very implicit. So yeah, you know, you second out yourself, and all of that in itself is further stress. So I think having spaces where you do feel safe is really important. I think I think we need to draw lines sometimes, and not actually prove ourselves to gazes that, or to people that are, you know, determined to disprove us. I think there's a bunch of people out there who are allies and who acknowledge and understand what Black people are going through. And I think there needs to be a line where we say, actually, I'm going to stop now, and we can't take on educating people on the oppression that puts us down and puts them up. I think you have to draw a line at some point, and focus on the people that do see and are there to support. So avoiding that kind of gaze. And also just acknowledging the difficulty that it is, because I think, like I said earlier, we kind of just push through things. We're like, yeah, we're going to keep going. You know, we've always been taught work twice as hard. You know, just put your head down. And I think we need to acknowledge that stress. It's like sometimes if you're not aware of what you're carrying on your shoulders, you don't tread easy. But if you're aware that there's a weight on your shoulder, then you can be easy with yourself. You can be gentle with yourself and acknowledge that actually this isn't easy. It's not even normal, to be honest. So yeah, I think that acknowledgement and trying to be gentle with yourself, take time. If, you know, listen to your body. Like, sometimes it's enough. Turn your phone off. Like, it's enough. Yeah, I think that's important as well.
Thank you. Ife, would you like to add anything as well on the topic?
Yeah, I think it's important to validate your feelings. So like for me, people try to invite me to speak on shows that I know are particularly hostile to Black people, that normally gaslight Black people. So I say no, I don't feel like I have to defend racism or defend my Blackness. I feel like, you know, we very much know that this is something that's been going on for years. Like, you know, anti-Blackness is a real thing. So I feel like if people are inviting you to spaces, feel free to say no. And also, like, I'm against the concept of like free labor. I don't think that people should be giving you free more labor. I feel like all the information you need is on Google. Like, you can go and find it. So I'm always like, yeah, like, take a break. You don't need to overwork yourself or prove anything to people, because the statistics are there. We know that our feelings are valid, and I think that's the most important thing, is how we as a community are perceiving things. And if it matters to the Black community and we're saying it's a problem, then it's a problem. And I think this idea of having to prove ourselves is the fact that we've obviously been dehumanized. I feel like we always feel like we have to humanize ourselves and prove ourselves. I think we don't need to do that. That's one thing. And I think for me, like, even till today, I haven't watched the video of George Floyd, because I said to myself, I'm not going to normalize watching these traumatic videos of Black people literally dying in order for me to feel empathy. So, you know, I feel like not feeling like you have to watch every video, not feeling like you have to, yeah, you have to like retweet on your timeline to get some sort of sympathy. I think that's very problematic. And I think also tapping into normalizing, you know, getting therapy. I think the Black Minds Matter group are literally offering free therapy to any Black person at the moment. I think tap into that, you know, get used to having therapy sessions if you need that, and finding safe spaces for you to speak with one another. I think that's important. I think, yeah, just having agency to talk. Like, a lot of research shows that, particularly like with Black men, not Black women in particular, because Black women tend to go to like churches, a lot of gatherings, they have a lot of space where they can talk to each other, but Black men don't have as much spaces. So it's trying to, you know, see, you know, where you may feel like you fit within that. If you need more support in some places, someone to talk to, and obviously opt into the therapy sessions. I think kind of getting to know yourself more, seeing where you need support with, and also just kind of normalizing the journey of good mental health, because there's no such thing as someone's just got bad mental health. It's like we either have good mental health or bad mental health, and kind of it's a sliding scale. So I think kind of normalize conversations around mental health, about, you know, anxiety, how you're feeling, but also validating your feelings. I think that's important, because I feel like for all too long, Black people's feelings have not been validated. I think a way of empowerment is validating your experience and letting that be letting that be your story, and being free with it and being okay to say no. So I think those are like really good ways.
Thank you. Courtney, do you have anything to add as well?
Yeah, for a long time as a race and within our communities, we've been enduring, and we kind of need to kind of take a step back and, you know, look at the stigmas and say that's not true, and actually this is not actually helping, it's not promoting good health. You know, the idea of having therapy, you know, it's kind of a new concept that people are kind of accepting and taking on, even just speaking about it freely. And, you know, that's something that we're trying to work on and improve on. And like everybody's kind of saying, it comes down to that validation. In the past, it's kind of, you know, you've been looked down upon, you've been chastised, you've even been demonized for, you know, certain behavior or displaying certain traits. It's time to just kind of look at things from a more humane perspective and look, if we need help, let's say we need help. If we need support, let's have support. But at the same time, we need these places to go to. We need the people to talk to. And that's not quite there. You know, that openness, that trust in, you know, government, organizations, people. We're working on it. And, you know, we're building, we're becoming stronger in ourselves individually, we're becoming stronger as a group, but it's elements of distrust in culture, in society. And until that changes, it's going to be a bit hard, but we're working on it. And hopefully we have more positive outcomes. We have more positive development in our communities to kind of say, well, look, no, you know, something's going on here. Let's talk about this. Let's sit down. Let's have a conversation. Don't assess me. Don't evaluate me. Talk to me. You know, discuss with me. Help me. And hopefully we have more of that going on.
So according to the Same Race Equality Foundation research, Black Caribbean people had the highest rate of detention in mental health institutions. That was greater than all of the other ethnicities, the 16 other ethnicities that were listed there. What do you think in terms of practical, either policy implementation or community work? Like, what practically do you want to see to stop those numbers being so high? Because there is a very high rate of Black people being institutionalized and detained, but then there's not much being done about it. So what does it look like, either from a community perspective or from a legal or from a government response? Like, what do you think will actually tackle those very shocking statistics? Sarah, if you want to go.
Thank you. I think there needs to be more research into Black mental health. Like, so many of the studies and like the way our mental health system has been set up is based on researching white people. And we talk about institutional racism. It's not like it just exists in one institution, which is the police or the criminal justice system. I think we need to understand the ways it manifests even across healthcare, including mental health. So yeah, I definitely think more research into the impact of trauma, collective trauma and racism on our mental health. Our experience of navigating the world is different for these reasons. Yeah.
Ife, do you have any other like practical suggestions or government responses that you would like to see and how to actually deal with these high detention numbers?
Yeah, I would echo everything that Sarah said in terms of like, who were these institutions made in mind with, who was the research done on, but particularly looking at America, because they have a much more sizable Black population. They've been able to kind of develop concepts, particularly looking at like Afrocentric narratives, looking at African psychology, and those center literally Black lived experiences in terms of like the Mamangamizi, looking at like the experience of the Black community globally and how that's affected our health in the diaspora. So I think, yeah, kind of tapping into more research done by Black people, particularly like Black psychiatrists, Black psychologists, Black therapists, having them in the spaces to validate our narratives. And I think also looking at different forms of supporting Black people. So I know there's like dance, like therapy and different therapies. And I think, you know, particularly with us and our culture, like the Black community, like music, culturally, music and dance is something that's very important to us. I think incorporating things that are normalized to our experience and our everyday, you know, approaches to life, normalizing those forms of therapy, I think is important as well. So I think have a shake-up of the system. And I think working with groups like Black Thrive, which work in Lambeth, because Lambeth, even though Black people are only 30% of the population, they represent 70% of the detained parts of the mental health institution in Lambeth. So it's kind of like looking at what Black Thrive is doing, seeing, you know, working with people that have gone through recovery, you know, how they found it, what changes they wanted, working with researchers and kind of changing, you know, how Black people are going to thrive in Lambeth. So I think having much more community-led, community-focused initiatives like that all across the UK would be something that's really, really good. I think, you know, looking at stuff like Shaney's Law, which was looking at how force is used against Black people, particularly when they've been arrested. I think just all those kind of things, like holistic, because a lot of the information is already there. It's just about implementing a lot of these things. So I don't really feel like there is new information that needs to be out there, because all the information, I talked about Ibrahim Say, that was in 1996. We're in 2020 and having the same conversations. So these things are not new. So I think kind of sitting back and seeing where things have gone wrong, what reports have already been written, and what Black people are saying, what Black psychologists are saying, and then incorporating those into everyday narratives. We're saying that Black people are being over-medicated. We should look into that. So I think, you know, all this research is there, but people are not acting on it. So it's not even like we need to do a new inquiry. We don't need any more information. It's already there. I think it's just a stage of action, and it's just getting the action that is the problem. So I think, yeah, that is where I'm seeing things at the moment.
But is there like one specific response that you would, so if you had, you know, you could talk to the cabinet and then you could tell them, this is the one thing I want you to do to help Black communities, mental health and stuff like that, what would you actually suggest in terms of that they should do to combat this?
I don't think there can be one thing. I think it's multifaceted. I think in order for you to fully have a system which is flowing properly, you'd have to have the police engaged. You'd have to have, in terms of like removing power from them and having more investment in the mental health services, having much more Afrocentric therapy, having Black people much more involved, doing much more Black British research, because a lot of research that we have is American focused, but looking at the intersect of like the Caribbean and Africa, and like just different narratives that are quite unique to our experience. I think research, I think, is one thing. I think having a lot more Black people encouraged to go into mental health services, but also I would say taking a lot of the therapies out of those institutions and putting them back into the community and seeing what more community-based early intervention mechanisms that can be put into place, so we don't have to get to this stage. Because a lot of the time we find that with Black people, by the time they already enter that crisis point, they never had any sort of early intervention. So stuff around early intervention, I think, is obviously very much key. But I think those are all holistic, and I can't say this is the one thing you need to do, because it's like the whole system needs to change from bottom up. So I think there's a mixture of different things, but I think early intervention is definitely something that can help as well.
That's very true. Vivian, as somebody who like does work specifically in mental health, like what type of, do you think what can be done in terms of accessing early intervention, or that can help better cater towards if you do have Black patients, and how you actually administer care? Or do you have specific care tactics for Black patients, or is it like one size fits all?
It's definitely not one size fits all. Even though the Black community experienced a very unique experience in Britain, we're still so different in so many different ways. You know, someone from South Africa is not the same as someone from North Africa. You know, we still have cultural differences, but in general, I think there's still a consensus around, like, you know, navigating in somewhere like Britain. In regards to ways to approach mental health, what I'm looking at the moment with my master's is actually culturally adapted mental health interventions specific to the Black community. So some of the themes that are coming up so far are things like ethnic matching, which is why, you know, things like Black Minds Matter are really important. It makes such a difference to be able to relate to someone within a therapeutic space, you know, someone that looks like you, someone that might understand your culture and your experiences. So things like that are really important. There was a thing around having resources. So there was one study that looked at, you know, having Afro combs and having cultural food available on the ward. and by the end of the study, it's reported great satisfaction just because, you know, they had things like that. So there are small things that people can do within mental health services, and there is research out there. But I think the problem is that it's just not being implemented, and we keep, you know, for the last 20 years, the statistics have been, you know, Black people have been higher in psychosis and schizophrenia and common mental health disorders. That's for the last 20 years. So it's not like this is new. We know this is the case, which is why I think it does need to start from the bottom, like it is doing, you know, things like Black Thrive, BIPP, Black Minds Matter. They're kind of taking the ownership back to give back to the community. Yeah, so I think there's a big importance around accessible therapy. I think we need to shift into community psychology a lot more. And like if I was saying, it, waiting until somebody's sectioned or put under detention by the police is almost a step too late. If we can start creating, you know, an awareness and a language around mental health, so that when we see early warning signs, you know, if someone's stopped going out as much or they're not really taking care of themselves physically, seeing that, oh, you know, they're not being lazy or they're not, yeah, they're acting stupid. It's like maybe there's actually something further, there's something deeper there. So I think if we keep improving the language around what mental health looks like when someone might be deteriorating, people can notice this faster and kind of, yeah, have that early intervention, but also have that within community. So, you know, we go to church a lot, we go to mosque a lot, we have a lot of, you know, cultural things that we take part in. If we start bringing those narratives within those spaces that we already are, it's a lot easier to engage with it. So one of the things we're working on in the moment in Hackney is reaching out to community services to create that bond and to have that consensus where, you know, they can reach out to us in an easier way and understand what mental health might look like. So yeah, I think community psychology, having therapy that is culturally specific for our people, and also trying to, I think social support is really important. Poor mental health can be linked to many things, and if we have social support, that's almost like a mitigating safety net against those. So drawing on that and really seeing it as a resource is important too.
Thank you. And it's also so great that you are taking further education to like research more in that and have more of the formal education you need to actually tackle these issues. I just wanted to bring in Ola and ask if there's any community-led things that you think would be useful to better the mental health that you know personally or that you've participated in.
Yeah, I think that like a thing that we don't talk enough about is that like as Black people, ethnic minorities in impoverished area, we don't have enough access to kind of nature. We don't have enough access to kind of be, we're like caged up in flats and high rises, and our youth centers are closed down, and there's just not enough for our young people to engage in outside of school. There's not, like, over the years, a couple of the centers that I've worked in, they've closed down, and then these young people get recruited by other gang members, and do you know what I mean? And it's just a cycle, and it's just like, how do we really create holistic care and sustainable holistic care, and actually fund like the services that are there for the young people that are providing this, because we've had them in the past, but they haven't been sustainable. So like an organization that I work with is called LifeBeat. And so we take young people during the summer, we take them to the countryside for a week. And the way in which we just see like young Black boys who are just like this all the time. And there's just like, it's being in London, being in this kind of environment, they're aware of the way in which like they're being policed, they're aware in the way in which like they're being stereotyped, and there's a need to kind of almost like navigating that is really difficult, and like talking about mental health is really difficult. But then when you take young people out of the space that is essentially detrimental to their mental health, and you take them away and you give them access, you give them freedom, and you give them space, and you see how open and welcoming they want to engage about these conversations. And it's just really like, how do we provide more resources and services and sustain them yeah, I think that like there needs to be more focus on kind of definitely kind of like engaging with nature, engaging with like kind of alternative kind of, I don't know, I'm really a big fan of circle work. In my youth work, we do a lot of circle work as opposed to me standing there and talking to young people. It's definitely more inclusive. We do like gratitude circles, heart circles, things like that, just giving young people the language and the space to always engage with their feelings and emotions. We will do highs and lows and things like that. It's just like really, because sometimes you need to give permission for young people to feel like the space they can take up that space. Yeah, I'd like to kind of ask, there's a question that's come through. So in terms of like the high numbers of Black folks being detained at crisis point, why do you think that it gets to crisis point? Why do you think that there aren't more preventative measures? Why do you think that like, yeah, like I think that like there's an issue with like policing and engaging with kind of Black folks with mental health issues, and it's just, I think a lot of the times, kind of mental health displays are seen as violent, aggressive, and they're criminalized, as opposed to care being engaged when people are going through crisis. I like to hear kind of Vivian's perspective, and yeah.
So you're asking why this is continued? Just to make sure I'm answering the right question.
Why does it get to crisis point? Why aren't there more prevention, especially, yeah, within kind of, I think that like over the years, there's definitely more conversations about mental health, but why are we still not seeing that much change in how the crisis point? Why are we still not seeing kind of prevention schemes and stuff?
So I think it's more of a historic issue in terms of like how mental health has been managed within the NHS. So typically it's been led by psychiatrists who are obviously doctors who have trained within mental health. They've always approached it with a very biological model where it's like, you know, you're hearing voices, you're talking to yourself, you see things, therefore you have an imbalance of dopamine, therefore we give you this antipsychotic, it balances the dopamine, you're all good, go about your business. So it's been very black and white. And it's only of the last maybe 20, 25 years that there's been a push of literature that's been looking more at the mind and looking at how, you know, social factors can contribute. And now it's moved beyond that, and people are looking at cultural differences and how that can also have an effect, how, you know, where you were brought up, whether you're employed, where you went to school, you know, your race, your gender, how all of these things, your sexuality, how all these things can actually contribute to your mental health. And it's a more holistic picture. But I think because that process has been very slow, and still mental health services are very biological based. Like when you go into hospital, you are prescribed medication, but you don't necessarily see a psychologist. So there's still a bias and a kind of slow burner in terms of how mental health is seen and treated by the people that hold the power. I think a lot of academics are pushing towards, and a lot of psychologists are pushing towards trying to make it more holistic and make it about the person. But ultimately, you know, it's not a psychologist that decides whether or not you can leave a hospital, it's a psychiatrist. So where the power lies within mental health services is still very much in their hands. And I think that might take a bit longer for it to change. Things are changing slowly. You know, there is a push for funding. You know, the whole clinical psychology route is now funded by the NHS. So they are pushing for these things, and there is evidence to show that psychological interventions improves well-being, and I think it was actually equal to taking medication in terms of success rate. So I think that's exacerbated by the fact that when you're Black, especially with Black women, for example, if you know, express something to your GP, for example, that can be often overlooked, which is why there's a lot of issues around Black women within physical healthcare. So I think that same bias can be reflected in mental health care. But then there's also a perceived fear of Black people, where there's been a lot of studies that have shown that staff have been afraid of Black patients, and that fear is also felt by the patient, and that's reciprocated. So there's this concept of, you know, Black people have this super strong strength, and that bias leaks into the working environment. So there's a very complicated relationship between the Black community and mental health services. And as they've moved away from being so heavily medication based, because Black people suffered the most from it, you know, they were given the highest doses of medication, and that's gone on to affect them for the rest of their lives. There's still a generation of people from the 80s and 90s that you'll meet today, and, you know, their hands are shuffling, you know, their mouths, they can't keep their mouths closed because the medication has changed their biology. So I think it will take a lot of time to heal those relationships, and also the system itself is trying to reset very slowly. And us constantly being on the back end of that means we reap the benefits last. So yeah, it's quite complex.
Thank you. We've also got another question that's asking if we need to look at our own internalized stereotypes and stigmas when it comes to mental health, it's very difficult to talk about mental health within our communities. I haven't heard from Courtney in a bit. I'd like to throw that question at you, if that's okay.
Yeah, being disabled, so I'm just going to talk. Yeah, coming to the stigmas, kind of mentioned before in the last kind of panel there. Culturally, the way we view things and the way some things are represented, you know, if we look at some of the behaviors that we have in church, if somebody displays maybe mental health traits or certain behaviors, it's kind of seen as demonization, or it's seen as the person is unworldly, and, you know, they're treated in a way which is it's seen almost treated with magic, or treated with harshness, treated with, we have to get rid of this. When actually all it takes is that maybe there's a condition going on, and a little bit of talking, a little bit of support, a little bit, even sometimes medication can help to stabilize somebody. And we've got to have these talks and discussions, and I think it's development as well, to kind of look past what we've been told and what we know, and just kind of be a bit more involved in terms of information-wise and research, studying, like it's been mentioned, you know, and a lot of it is already based on European status, already based on European history. And, you know, we are not one of the same people. We have different backgrounds, we have different biology. It's a hard one, because to tell somebody no, that's wrong, it means standing up against something which could be enshrined in our history, in your family, in your lineage. So I guess it's finding that strength to sometimes stand up and have a voice and look a bit deeper and seek out the support, ask the questions, second guess things, and, you know, having people in the hospitals, in the places who we can talk to, who have had the same experiences, who do know about our biology better, that will help and improve our experiences. And with that, in time, we will be on that kind of playing field where we feel comfortable to talk about things, and we're not going to stigmatize, we're not going to demonize, we're going to actually humanize and say, well, actually, no, we can help you here. Actually, no, we do know what's going on here. And we've got a method here you can try, which is not going to make you feel alienated from society. It's not going to make you feel weak. It's going to strengthen you, empower you. And that's how I look at it at the moment. I don't really have too much of a medical view on things, because that's not my background. But that's more my personal view and experiences that I've had.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate hearing that from you. And your perspective, I think, is very important as well. Just looking, it's not just about this psychiatrists and psychologists, it's also about community activists and those that are engaging with our young people, and like what they're seeing on the ground floor in terms of how young people are engaging with mental health, and what they're seeing and the communication, and what they're seeing as the stereotype, and how the conversation kind of moves forward. So thank you. Another question that we have been asked in the chat box is, I think this is in terms of mental health, as saying, what would you advise on how other ethnic minorities can get involved and how can they help each other? Is this in to support kind of like your Black friends kind of during this current political moment? I guess you would support your friends in the way that you would support them any other time, or if they were going through a hard time in their life, you would check in and make sure that they're okay. You make space so that they can have conversations with you and not expect them to do the work for you. In terms of like engaging in the politics, I think that like kind of doing your own research so that you're coming from an equal perspective, and your friends or community members don't feel like they have to explain themselves. They have to explain what racism is or how they're experiencing racism. I think that definitely plays a significance in just being there and feeling like you can take space and have these really, really hard conversations. Leonie, do you have anything else to say? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that honestly, everything that has been said, I totally agree with. As a community, though there has been more conversations, like conversations is not enough to actually implement the changes that we need to see, and there are very much structural changes that need to happen. But at the same time, more conversations do need to be had, and talking while, overlooked is actually really useful, because talking about our mental health has been minimized, so much so that even if we feel like we're talking about it, not everyone is. There was another question that came through about how trying to be successful as a Black person, you're trying to study, get a good career, not let your side down, be like the good, respectable young person. Like, how do you actually deal with all of these pressures that are coming from the expectations your family put on you, society puts on you, that you have to succeed? How do we manage that? And this is probably going to be like the final comments as well, as we're running out of time. But we're just going to start with Ife, which, if you can respond to that question, but also your final comment as well.
So in terms of what we should be doing going forward?
Yeah, you can say that, but also how to deal with all of the pressures that come from being like a Black person, when you have so much expectations placed on you to be successful, to be the good one, to help the community, to get a good job, like all of these things that we are pressured, and how to actually navigate that.
Well, I'm personally trying to normalize the idea of Black people just being mediocre and actually not having to be excellent, because I feel like all the time we go into our Black excellence, and it's only really ever connected to when we enter white spaces, like, law, medicine, like, do you know what I mean? It's like, oh my gosh, Black excellence if you go into Cambridge. And it's like, we always have to celebrate defeating the odds that should have never been there in the first place. So I think I'm trying to normalize Black joy as a way of resistance, and whatever makes you feel happy in a space that you are, I think that should be normalized too. I don't think we should be over reliant on having to kind of prove something, because Toni Morrison said so well that what with racism is like someone says that you haven't got anything, you spend all your life trying to be like, oh yeah, no, Africa's got this, Africa's got that. It's like you're in a constant stage of trying to prove that you're just as good, and that suggests to me that you have been as affected as being affected by this as the other person has, because you're trying to respond and prove to them that, oh, I'm just as good. And I think it's not our position to having to be proving ourselves, because we are normal and we're just like everyone else, and we have feelings, we go through life like everybody else. And I think we need to stop placing this burden on ourselves to be excellent all the time. So I think that's obviously one thing. And I think it's trying to do more things that make you happy. Exploring different things, like someone was talking about like looking at nature, reading, like just do stuff that makes you happy. And I think pursuing careers that maybe not traditional, like maybe becoming an author or just different things. I think definitely just pursuing what would make you happy. I think that's it really. I feel like you shouldn't necessarily feel like you need to be a beacon of a successful Black community, because we shouldn't have to be seen as a community, we should see it as individuals, and how we feel is validated as well. So I think, yeah, normalizing the idea of you're just as important as everyone else, and you don't need to be excellent. You could just be as good as you need to be, but not anything extra. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. And Sarah, if you have any final comments or you want to respond to the question, whichever one.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Ife was saying. Yeah, I think it's interesting how there's this idea that like, oh, sorry. Like people don't choose to be interested in racism, you know, it's not like a hobby. So as well as trying to be successful and juggle all these other things, it's like we also have to deal with fighting for our rights, fighting for our humanity. So I'd really echo Ife where she was saying like, just be human and work out who you are without all the oppression, without all the trauma, and take time for yourself to explore that. And yeah, it's like exploring Black joy as an act of resistance. I completely believe in that. Audre Lorde said, self-care is an act of political warfare. And it's one of my favorite quotes. I think taking that time to be yourself and take care of yourself is fundamental for movements to succeed.
Thank you so much. Vivian, if you have any final comments.
Yeah, definitely agree with that quote as well. And I'm on the same kind of thinking. Like the human race has such a variance. You know, you have some people that they might not work for their whole life, and you have some people that are millionaires, and there's everyone in between. And just like you have that with every race, you're gonna have that with the Black race, and that's absolutely fine. Choosing where you are within that is your personal journey, and people shouldn't be shamed. So I guess even calling out people when they are being shamed for those things is part of that process. But I guess for an individual who's dealing with that pressure, I would say to find spaces where you're allowed to reflect and be yourself and validated, and you don't have that pressure where, you know, what you present is not enough. There's always someone out there with a listening ear who's not going to be judgmental and will hear you. So trying to find those spaces where you can really reflect and connect with the self that's true. And sorry, no worries. My closing point would be breaking the taboo around mental health, and trying to have those conversations more within our families, within our friendship groups, and, you know, yeah, trying to make that conversation okay, the same way we can talk about other things, you know, like physical health. Let's try and normalize that within our groups. Yeah.
Thank you. And Courtney, if you have any final comments, please.
Yeah, I would just like to say, I think ultimately it comes down to accepting you're not going to be able to please everybody, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's your teacher. People are going to have expectations of you, and that's okay, but you don't have to meet them. It's like what everybody's saying, it's about yourself. Happiness comes from within. It's about being yourself, and you can have ambition, you can set yourself goals. Be aware you may not make them, you may not get there, you may not do it in the time you want to. And that's not a bad thing. We have to stop trying to compete for that gold trophy. Actually, even putting a gold trophy there, because life's not about getting a gold trophy. It's about living the best life and the best happiness that you can find within yourself. And if you've got the skills to be an entrepreneur, a billionaire, if you're working in construction, if you're educating, if you're just there having a relaxed life, if you're happy with that, that is fine. Be happy with yourself, be happy with what you're doing, and sometimes just learn to block other people out. You know, we just need to switch off from others sometimes. Even the closest people to us, sometimes they're the ones who are the most toxic. And you just be aware of your relationships, be aware of your communication with people, go forward being happy with yourself and striving for your own happiness before you try to think about pleasing anybody else. Please yourself, invest in yourself.
Thank you. That's a very great word to finish on, that we need to invest in ourselves and we need to believe in ourselves. I have very much enjoyed this conversation. We have gone from detentions and institutionalized, Black people being institutionalized, to criminalization, to self-care as a form of resistance, which I do love that quote as well. please, all of our panelists who've taken the time out to have 2 panels in varying differences, but have intersecting ideas. So thank you so much, Courtney, Ife, Sarah, Vivian. Thank you so much to my co-host, Ola. It's been very great. One of the last things I will say is that if you could, please check out the link that I am going to post, which is where Ubele is actually raising money for the We Need Answers campaign, which is talking about the large amount of BAME deaths that have happened under the pandemic. So if you could please donate to that campaign, anything will be useful. But if you cannot donate, please share. We have seen the power of social media, and sharing and spreading awareness honestly is a form of social currency. So if you can't bring actual pounds, then use the social currency that you do have. Yes, please do keep connecting with people in the comments. I've loved seeing the conversation. Ola, if you have any final words to say as well.
I'm just so happy to have been part of the conversation and to get to hear all the different perspectives and to feel like, you know, we're having these conversations and we're taking actions to actually create sustainable change and sustainable communities. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on and engaging with us. And thank you everybody for engaging in the comments and the chats. I've been reading all your interesting comments, and some people have been really active with some of the information that they've been like sharing. Thank you. We've been reading those. Thank you so much. Yes, it's been so amazing.
Yeah, so thank you guys. You're free to go if you would like to.